paper because it says, like, here's these methods that we all kind of knew about. Pre-post designs, I think most people in this room probably at least had some passing familiarity with, if not, really knew them well. But we don't often use them. At least I never did. And this Clifford et al. Paper then went through and just ran a bunch of studies comparing different ways of running studies, which I thought was a really clever thing. So they have like 6 or 7 in this paper. I'm going to show you one. It's about genetically modified organisms, which is just like a type of food processing thing that is sometimes controversial. And it's a framing study. And they have 3 different versions of the study. So one is the typical post-only study. So they're assigned to 1 or 2 conditions to complete the outcome variable. There's a pre-post version, and then there's this quasi-version, quasi-pre-post. The research question is, does framing GMOs as helpful or harmful change attitudes about GMOs? And so they have 2 conditions, really simple design. The pro-GMO condition is a frame that focuses on how foods can be modified to be more nutritious, which is why GMOs are awesome, actually. And then anti-GMO focuses on potential harmful health effects, which I think are mostly bogus, but that's a different story. The outcome is then support for the production and consumption of GMOs. So this is not like a super insightful psychology study, just to be clear, right? The prediction is when you tell people good stuff, they like it more than when you tell people bad stuff, okay? So this is not, I wouldn't tell my parents about this study as why we should, do psychology, but it's a useful example. And then they also included, for the quasi-version, their quasi-variable was questions about support for banning chemical pesticides and banning the use of antibiotics on livestock, which prior work has suggested is correlated with GMO attitudes. So here is the result of that study. When you do the post-only, which is our typical between-subject design, the frame works. People became more supportive of GMOs. It's a standardized effects of about 0.5, which is pretty good. The pre-post is exactly the same, but the confidence interval is a little skinnier. And the quasi one, this effect happens to be larger. It's not really clear why. And actually, the confidence interval is about the same as the pre-post. But the point here, what's important about this, is that they all work. The study works in all of them, right? So in my methods training, I was led to believe that the pre-post one here would be a smaller effect size because people don't want to change their mind after saying their pre thing. That is not what happened here. So that is useful because this is different than what I would have expected from my research methods class. And they have, this is one of, I think, 6 studies in this paper. So you can look at that paper and you'll see other study designs and you get the same similar thing across all of them. So the key thing here for the statistical power in your participants is that the effect sizes in the pre-post designs were much more precisely estimated. So these are the pre-post versions. They do a version where they have control variables too, but that doesn't matter much. And the standard error is about a third of the size. So that means you're more precisely estimated, which means you need fewer participants to get the same level of statistical power. The post-only, which is the typical between-subject design, and the quasi-post one, pre-post, didn't really have the same, they didn't really differ. And there's a good reason for that, actually. The reason this quasi one didn't have the same reduction in standard error is because the quasi-pre variables correlated at like 0.2 with the outcome variable. So they just were not very good variables to use for this. At least when I did this before. What it looked like is that in the pro-GMO condition, there was more people doing consistent change than in the anti-GMO condition, whereas for inconsistent change, that was much more likely in the anti-GMO condition. So there's more people that have backlash effects essentially in the anti-GMO condition. This suggested different rates of backlash occur in each of these conditions. And so if you're interested in framing effects for this specific issue, this is useful to know like where you're more or less likely to get people reacting against your frame. So what I want to highlight is, so first of all, we find that for many people, the frame did cause a change in attitudes. We find that actually if many people maybe don't change. So I think with including these additional measures in our experiments, I think is really potentially super powerful. And we just need to include them before our experimental manipulations. I think actually in many cases this is straightforward. It doesn't substantially increase the cost of studies unless you use really long measures, and then that's a different story. But in that GMO study, that was one extra item. That is nothing, essentially, in these studies. If you have a 60-item dependent measure, I can get how that's going to be more costly. But even then, with a 60-item measure, one thing you can consider is randomly assigning people to a subset of that measure for the pre-measure. That would still work as a potentially pretty good kind of semi-quasi pre-post design. I think that this is nice just if you're studying really normal samples where it's easy to get data, because you'll have more precise estimates and you can run more studies on your samples. I think it's really important if you're doing studies with hard-to-reach populations where you can't get very many participants. I think this is the way to go. In a study I'm doing with, there's an organization that I'm working with in the United States where they bring people together who disagree on issues, sometimes political issues, sometimes religious issues. And they have them have conversations with each other about those issues. And they're like these guided conversations that try to do it in a way that's respectful and empathy building. And in that study, we've been doing these pre-post measures, and then there's an experimental condition that tries to improve on their program. And I first of all don't know exactly what we'll find. But overall, at least the method of it has been straightforward. We had to already contact everybody before the study anyway, so we just asked them to complete measures. Afterwards, the organization was always contacting participants afterwards because they want to get an evaluation of their program, they want to get people's feedback, and this is useful for them. And so we just added questions onto both of those things. And so now we took these conversations are intensive, but what I mean by that is they take like an hour or two. So it's not like we can run 1 million participants or 1,000 participants. That's already hard for this. But I think we'll have a couple hundred participants, and with the pre-post design, I think we're going to have a much better shot of knowing whether our intervention worked or not. So I think it's really nice to learn new things with this design.